And welcome back to American Agenda. I'm Heather Childers along with Bob Sellers. There's some reports saying that COVID vaccine manufacturer Moderna is now testing their vaccines on children and that kids could expect to receive their first dose by the fall. So what exactly does this mean for those who want to get back into the classroom? And what and who is standing in the way of our schools reopening? Stacey, I'll start with you on this one because we've touched on this before, and I know you think that the kids need to all be back in the classroom. And we're just wondering, will this be one step forward in being able to accomplish that sooner? Or is this even needed? Because most studies, at least that we've seen, show that children aren't impacted as directly by COVID.
Well, I mean, obviously children can catch COVID-19, but they are much lower risk than adults. And I think the biggest deal here is that we have an example of what can happen in these school districts by what's happening in the private schools across the country. And that is that they've been open since August and they've not had super spreader events. Dr. Leana Wen has actually admitted as much in articles and interviews that she's doing across the country right now. So this is just an additional step that's being heralded by the teachers unions and followed by Joe Biden that enables them to delay the return of children into the classroom. Parents should be looking into pandemic pods, looking into other options for their kids. If our daughter was still in public school and her school wasn't open, we would have already made another option for her because it demonstrates a lack of desire to teach these kids and to care for their primary needs. And teachers should not be in a position where anyone should ever have to accuse them of that. And it's because of the unions that these kind of negative statements are being made because they're true.
Yeah, public schools versus private schools, state versus state, because there are some states where the kids have been back in the classroom for a long period of time, Ted, but then other states, similar to the businesses being closed down and locked down for longer periods of time. Then you're going to have the children in some states who are behind by a year, and then other students in other states and other children who have been able to progress. So there's a whole nother issue that you're dealing with.
You bet. I think this whole thing is ridiculous. When you look at the actual death rate across the country, only 0.2% of the deaths are from people under the age of 24 and under. That's 140 people total in the United States under the age of 24 have died of the COVID sickness, whatever you want to call it. And yet we are destroying an entire generation of kids by not putting them back in school. What is the agenda? That's the question I ask, is why are we doing that and destroying this entire year's worth of education? And the people that it's hurting the most are those that come from low-income families, because high-income families, they can put their kids in private schools, they can put them into charter schools, but you have these low-income families in inner cities where a lot of times you don't have charter schools and they can't afford private schools, and they're the ones being impacted the most because both parents have to work.
Right, and we've talked at length about the issue with the mental health of these students, and then the issue of the food insecurities when a lot of these children depended on, their food to go to school. Quill, do you think that this is just another excuse that unions will use to keep the students from getting back into the classroom, because now they say, we have to have all of the students, all of them have to receive the vaccine as well as the teachers before you can let them back into the classroom?
I sincerely hope not, but I'm skeptical because this is what we've seen again and again. I think this is a major problem for President Biden and Democrats in Congress. I think that this, the progression of this and the delay tactics that they've used to prevent kids from getting back in schools, it's making it incredibly apparent to parents across the country that Democrats are on the side of the unions, not on the side of parents and students. And that's a huge problem. I mean, as we've said, this is absolutely devastating. I mean, we just passed about a year mark since this whole pandemic started, and that's absolutely devastating for students to be out of school in this time. And so I think there's a big opportunity for Republicans to come in here too and actually call out the liberal hypocrisy here and say, look, we're on the side of parents, we're on the side of students, and we're trying to get more students back in schools because this is what they need.
Yeah, Bob, I was reading an article last night by a well-known political pundit, a Democrat, who said this is the issue that will damage Democrats the most come 2022. And it was this move not getting our kids back into the classrooms.
Yeah, possibly, because it could be held against unions. Because here's the thing about the vaccine for kids. We don't need it. We need to send kids back to school. Unions, if you have been teachers or you're related to an industry in which you learn for a living, it's not like there's not something to study. There have been private schools back in school since last fall. Some of them full-time, some of them part-time that then became full-time. It's not like there's nothing to study. There are answers. And to act like we can't go back to school until this box is checked all the way down the line, it's not true. There's plenty out there. It works. We need to get people back into school.
Yeah, but they're following different science, apparently, because, I mean, the science really...
they're following politics.
Right, exactly. And that's what I was saying. The politics folks are saying are going to come back to bite them when it comes to the 2022 elections because it's gone this far. I mean, it'll be a year coming up that these kids have been out of class in some of these states and some of these schools, whereas you said, you know, the private schools have been back, and they could look at that and they could see how successful that it was.
Yeah. Even some public.
Right.
I mean, I've seen it.
Well, the same thing with the lockdowns. They're still refusing to give credit to Florida and the way they handled the pandemic versus California and the way they handled the pandemic and somewhere like New York. Because if you take a look at the numbers and the COVID cases, they're very similar. And so it would speak to, well, we could have opened up a lot sooner than we did in some of these other states.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Stand by. We're not done yet, though. We have another big segment coming up, and you don't want to miss this, folks. Being white is a disease. How one black media outlet is reporting that whiteness is a pandemic. That's not racist? I don't know. Is that racist? We'll discuss coming up after this on American Agenda.